Right, everybody. I just real quick wanted to go over the quiz from the Enterprise Risk Management article I had you read that was put out by COSO. So you can see what I was hoping for answers there, what I thought was important about that. And then I wanted to give you a little heads up about what the exam's going to look like for this week. So that's the only expectation for this week is to complete the exam. So that's the good news. The bad news is that's 150 minutes worth of time that you've been given to respond to 15 questions. And I think you will need more than half of that time. This is not an exam. On those 15 questions, you cannot complete this in 20 minutes, at least not in full measure that you can prove that you learned what I wanted you to learn. One thing at a time, though. Let's go ahead and look at that quiz. Let me open it up, and let me show you what I was hoping we were going to be talking about here for the Enterprise Risk Management quiz. Okay. So, primary goal is to minimize or eliminate risk. No, we're trying to minimize the cost of risk. And that's a very different thing. Part of being in business is you are going to have to deal with certain risks. You cannot avoid them all. And it's extremely expensive to drive some risks to zero. Some risks are better off being retained. So we're trying to minimize the cost of risk. We're not trying to minimize risk. And that's a tiny distinction, but a really, really, really important one. Instead of frequency and severity, article says likelihood and impact. This is essentially the same. Yes, they're using, this is one of the things. So as a risk management person, I get a little frustrated with the accounting side for trying to take over what I consider to be the key parts of our discipline. They use different words, but the ideas are exactly the same, and they're not new, and they're not, I think the accounting perspective on risk management is narrower than it needs to be. Their perspective on risk management is it's primarily an audit function, and that's fine. That makes sense. But that's narrower than what I consider risk management itself to be. But anyway, question 2 is just an example of using different words to talk about the same thing. Article recommends assessing risk impact on a 10-point scale. False. No. That gives this idea of false precision, and I ranted about that in the lecture. I'm going to rant about it again. And you'll see I use this in our exams. I may have said this in the lecture. You grade somebody's essay response on a scale of 1 to 10. Well, hardly anybody is from 1 to 5, right? Because these are master's students. They know the answers. They're doing well. The problem is that top half. Can you really say that this answer is worth 8 instead of 9? Or it's worth 7 instead of 8? I think it implies precision that you don't have. And that's a real problem. So yeah, in this particular one, no, they actually recommend fewer points. So that one's false. Article recommends evaluating risk by vulnerability and velocity. This is new, and that's true compared to what we did. We have other ways to talk about that in risk management, but those are aspects of risk that are worth thinking about. So it is a deeper look than the text gives you in Chapter 1, for example. Residual risk is inherent in the business activities. The idea here with residual risk is, you eliminate what you can, and what's left over, that's residual. One of the advantages of qualitative is that it makes cost-benefit decisions easier. False. Quantitative is supposed to simplify that for us because it puts it into numbers, right? But when you've got it in words, that doesn't necessarily do much for you in ways of cost-benefit. So not what we were looking for there. Scenario analysis is quantitative. That's true. One of the problems with quantitative is that it leads in overconfidence to the quality of decision. True, absolutely. It's related to the earlier false precision idea. You can put all your decision metrics together and they can be really neat, and you put it in and it spits out a number that says this is what you should do. Okay, but that's only as good as your underlying assumptions. And the article points that out as a problem. So yeah, that's true. In the risk diagram, you can look at that and see what we're talking about. If I remember right, the size of the dots didn't indicate severity. I think the size of the dots were speed of onset. I don't remember it. I don't have it in front of me. But you can see that. And then Exhibit 8, same thing. You can see what the right answer there was supposed to be. So I'm not trying to trick anybody. It's just I'm trying to highlight the important things. And by asking certain questions, I can make sure that you read certain parts. Okay, so that's just a quick recap of the quiz so you have an idea of what you might have been looking at there. I do want to talk about the exam. So that's the only expectation for this coming week is complete the exam. Exam is all short answer. And I think most questions you're going to need multiple paragraphs to get full credit. So when I grade them 0, 1, 2. And that goes quickly and it's easy. A 2 means, yeah, you nailed it. I could hold this up to the class and say, this is the answer I wanted. It's complete. It's correct. It got everything that I was asking for. A lot of these questions have multiple parts to them. And when people don't get full credit, most of the time it's because they didn't address one of those parts of the question. So as a tip to do as well as you can, just double check and make sure you answered the question in full. Because most often it's not that people are wrong. It's that they're missing something and they got a 1 instead of a 2. A 0 is reserved for, you're way off here. This isn't what we're talking about. You can use your books. You can use your notes. I can't stop you, so I'd rather have you use them. That's okay. I do ask you to be a little careful if you're going to quote. If you quote, just please put it in quotes and tell me where you got it from. I'm interested in what you think. Okay, I think sometimes people get into trouble here because they think they can just go out and Google the answer and copy and paste. These questions don't work that way. Trust me, if you do that, number 1, the answer is a little weird. It doesn't seem to make sense. I'll know. And then number 2, I have Google too. So if I wonder, all I have to do is copy and paste what you gave me, and I can figure out if it came from another source. That's, you want to be real careful there. You do that in the wrong class, you can get thrown out of the program. My expectation, if you use it from another source, you have to tell me that you've done that. If you're going to hold it out as your own, then it needs to be your own. And that's what I want to know is, what do you think about it? I don't care what somebody else thinks about it. You sat through the lectures. Here's a question. What do you think? That's ultimately what I'm hoping for, is to find out. So I just grade 0, 1, 2. And then there has to be an adjustment at the end, obviously. And I can't do that until all the scores are in and I see what that distribution looks like. And then we'll put that into something that you're more familiar with. I'm not going to grade it on a percentage. In all honesty, if you got 20 points out of 30, I feel pretty good about that. 2/3 of the stuff you understood perfectly. I think that's great. I don't care that in some other class arbitrarily they've decided that that's 66% and that is not good. In this class, for what I asked you to do, I think that's just fine. But it does imply an obligation on me then to figure out a way to adjust scores. So exam, 15 questions, 150-minute time limit, so 2.5 hours. Make sure you have that amount of time set aside because you can't do it piece by piece. You have to do it all in one sitting. It'll kick you out otherwise. You can use books or notes. That's not a problem. If you are going to quote from a source, please do that. I'm way more interested in what you think than in what somebody else thinks. So ultimately, when I'm grading these, I'm saying, how did they respond? Not what answer did they find that came from another source. So 10 minutes a question is basically what you have. Some of the questions, I imagine you're going to look at that and say, I don't really remember exactly what we talked about here. Okay. If you have to go back, that's no problem. You aren't going to have enough time to do that for all the questions. So before you start, make sure you viewed those three lectures. You've taken both quizzes. There are questions on the exam from both of those quizzes, both of those articles, really, not the quizzes. I'm asking about some of those ideas. Other than that, everything was covered in lecture. There's nothing on the exam that is only in the book that we did not talk about. I try to stay away from that. So the focus is on making sure you watch the lectures. I think that's about as much good advice as I can give you. We're going to have 4 exams. They're all going to be similar. So the first one is probably the hardest because you don't really know what to expect. Once you've done it, you'll see it. And the exam is where the rigor comes in of a master's level course. And that's what this is. I have to make sure you're getting your money's worth. I wouldn't call the questions easy, but I wouldn't say that they should be incomprehensible either. I mean, if you've been watching the lectures, you should say, I remember talking about this. And you might have to brush up a little bit to come up with a real solid answer, but you shouldn't be blindsided by any of these, I wouldn't think. I try to be fair about that. Anyway, in the end, that's up to you to try to help me figure out if that's fair or not. And so I'll cut the explanation off here. If you have questions, sure, email me. As long as the exam is done sometime before Sunday on the 14th at the end of the day, that's 11:59 Eastern time. Any time in there is fine with me when you take it. Do the best you can, and I'm sure it'll be just fine. Thanks a lot, you guys.